Why the Imperium's trenches are a fate worse than death. I remember the day I stopped counting. Not the days. Those had become meaningless long before, blurring together into an endless gray expanse of mud and cordite and screams. No, I stopped counting the dead. That was when I knew I had finally become what the Imperium had always intended me to be. A number in a ledger, a body in a trench, a round in a magazine, waiting to be expended. My name was Corporal Van Harkis of the 47th Karathi Drop Infantry. But names meant nothing in the trenches. We were all just meat waiting for our turn to rot. God, Emperor, forgive me. But I wish I had died in the first week. I wish I'd taken that last bolt that killed Sergeant Mensk instead, the one that vaporized his head in a spray of superheated bone and brain matter while I stood close enough to feel the heat on my face. At least then I would have died, still believing, still human, still me. They say the Emperor protects. And perhaps he does. Somewhere in the golden halls of distant Terra, where the air is clean and the sun shines on marble that has never known blood. But here, in the endlessly churning mud of this nameless world, there is no protection. There is only the trench stretching away in both directions until it disappears into the chemical fog that never lifts, never parts, never grants us even the mercy of seeing the sky. I think there used to be a sky here. I have vague memories of being told this world's original designation during the descent from the troop ship. Some combination of numbers and letters that meant nothing then and means even less now. What does it matter what they called this place before the war came? Now it is simply hell with a different name. And I am one of its damned souls, still breathing, but already dead in every way that matters. The smell is what gets you first, not the blood. You grow accustomed to blood quickly enough. Though that first night I vomited until my stomach cramped and bile burned my throat. My hands shaking so badly, I could not hold my laser gun steady. After the first few days, you stop noticing the copper-sweet stench that hangs in the air like morning dew. No, it is the other smells that burrow into your skull and nest there, impossible to dislodge. No matter how hard you try to forget, I dream about them. Emperor, help me. I dream about the stench of this place. I wake up gagging, even though I am already awake, already here, already drowning in it. The chemical reek of the fog makes your eyes water and your lungs burn. Our tech priest, before something took him screaming into the darkness 3 months ago, insisted it was a combination of weapon discharge and atmospheric corruption. Though I saw what floated in that fog when the wind shifted just right. I saw things with too many limbs pulling themselves through the mire. I saw faces that were human once. I saw, and I screamed. And no one came because everyone was screaming about something. The smell of the latrines when they overflow makes you want to die. It mixes with the rainwater and the blood until the bottom of the trench becomes a stew of human waste and dissolved flesh. Sometimes you slip and fall, face first into it. And you want to drown. You want to just breathe it in and let it end. But your body will not let you. Your body keeps fighting even when your mind has given up. The smell of gangrene from the wounded is sweet and rotten at the same time. And it reminds me of my mother's bakery somehow. Emperor, curse me for thinking it. And that makes it so much worse, because now I cannot remember her face without smelling rotting flesh. We have no proper medical facilities, only a field chirurgeon who drinks recaf spiked with obscura to steady his hands while he cauterizes away limbs in the aid station. I watched him take off Private Jesson's leg last week. Jess was 17. He cried for his mother while the chirurgeon worked. We all pretended not to hear. Jess died anyway 3 days later, septic and delirious, calling out names we did not recognize. I held his hand while he went because someone should have. Because if I die, I want someone to hold my hand too. But I know no one will. We are past that now. We are past caring. But the worst smell, the one that is killing me from the inside out, is the one you cannot identify at first. It took me 3 weeks to understand what it was. 3 weeks of breathing it in and feeling it coat my lungs and seep into my bones. The smell of men giving up. It is a subtle thing, this odor of despair beneath all the other stenches that assault your senses. It is in the way the air feels thick and heavy, as if hope itself has weight. And its absence leaves a vacuum that is crushing us all slowly. It is in the silence between the barrages, when you would expect to hear voices, but hear only ragged breathing and the occasional sob that the man making it thinks he is hiding. But we all hear it. We all hear everything. And we are all pretending we do not, because acknowledging someone else's breakdown means acknowledging your own. I sob sometimes. I wait until deep night when everyone else is either asleep or pretending to be. And I press my face into the mud and sob until my ribs ache and my throat is raw. I cry for my mother, whose face I can no longer remember clearly. I cry for my sister, Miller, who I will never see married. I cry for the man I used to be, the one who believed the propaganda reels and thought war was glorious. That man is dead. I killed him myself, drowned him in this endless mud because he was too weak to survive what I have become. I was not always like this. God, Emperor, I swear I was not always this broken thing writing in the dark. I remember, though the memory feels like it belongs to someone else. Someone I might have known once in another life, being proud when I received my assignment. The 47th Karathi Drop Infantry had a reputation. We had fought in 3 campaigns before this one, each time earning commendations from Sector Command. Our regimental banner bore the Aquila in gold thread, and our colonel was said to have the ear of the Lord General himself. I was so young, so impossibly, stupidly young. 23 years old, and I thought I had seen everything because I'd survived the hive gangs and the Arbeits crackdowns and the food riots that left 100 dead in the lower levels. I thought I was hard. I thought I was ready. We marched in formation through the streets of our hive city, and people cheered. They actually cheered for us. Children threw flowers that I did not understand then were funeral wreaths, tokens for the dead we would certainly become. I caught one, a white lily that reminded me of the ones that grew in the hydroponics gardens where Miller worked, and I tucked it into my combat webbing like it meant something, like it was a blessing. I do not know when I lost it. Probably in the first assault. Probably when I was crawling through someone's intestines trying to reach cover. The lily seems so impossibly far away now, so impossibly clean and pure. Something from a world that never really existed. My mother cried when I left. I was annoyed with her then, embarrassed that she was making a scene at the embarkation station while the other men's families stayed stoic and proud. I told her to stop. I told her I would be fine, that the Emperor protects, that I would come home with medals and stories. I lied. I did not know I was lying then, but I was. And now I cannot remember what her tears looked like. I cannot remember if she said anything after I told her to stop crying. I cannot remember if I hugged her or if I just walked away because I was too proud and too stupid to show weakness in front of my new squad. I would give anything to go back to that moment, to hold her and let her cry and cry with her and tell her she was right to be afraid. right to want to hold on to me, right to know what I was too blind to see, that I was already dead, that we were all already dead, that the Imperium does not send soldiers to war. It sends corpses who have not stopped moving yet. The drop from orbit was routine. We had done it before, crammed into the bellies of ships that groaned and shuddered as they hit atmosphere. But we were young and stupid, and thought ourselves invincible in our carapace armor, with our laser guns charged and our faith in the Emperor secure. I remember laughing during the descent, actually laughing. Corporal Vesson was telling jokes about some scribe who had accidentally filed himself as deceased and spent 3 months trying to convince the administratum he was alive. We thought it was hilarious. We thought everything was hilarious because we were terrified, and laughter was the only way we knew how to deal with it. I have not laughed since the second week. I do not think I remember how. The insertion was unopposed. We landed in what the tactical cogitators identified as a relatively stable zone, already secured by elements of the 12th Mechanized and the 8th Penal Legion. The Mechanized had moved on to the next objective within hours, their officers telling us we had done the hard work, that holding the line was easier than taking it. More lies. Or maybe they believed it. Maybe they had never held the line before. Maybe they got to die clean in tank explosions that vaporized them instantly instead of letting them rot alive in the mud. The penal troopers had been wiped out to the last man by something the commissars refused to name. We found their bodies, what was left of them, when we were digging the trenches. They had been opened up like flowers, their ribs spread wide and their organs arranged in patterns that made your eyes hurt to look at. Private Colin threw up. I wanted to, but I had already learned not to waste food by vomiting. So I swallowed it back down and tasted acid for hours. We were told to dig in and hold the line while the main offensive pushed forward. 2 weeks at most, the captain said. Captain Joris, with his clean uniform and his medals and his complete and utter ignorance of what he was sending us into. Just hold for 2 weeks and the enemy will collapse. Easy duty, men. You will be behind the lines before you know it. That was 6 months ago, or perhaps 6 years. Time has no meaning in the trenches. Captain Joris is dead. He came to inspect our positions in week 3 and took a sniper round through the throat. He bled out in front of us, his hands scrabbling at the wound, his eyes wide and confused, like he could not believe this was happening to him, like somehow his rank should have protected him. It did not. Nothing protects you here. Nothing. We dug. Emperor, how we dug. The soil here is not really soil at all, but a substance that defies proper description. Too thick to be mud, too wet to be earth. Riddled with things that might be roots or might be veins from some vast organism that lies beneath us, dreaming hungry dreams. Our entrenching tools bent and broke. Men wept openly as they scooped away handfuls of the stuff, their fingers bleeding, their nails torn away. I lost 2 fingernails on the first day, just tore right off. I watched them fall into the mud and disappear, and I thought, those are part of me. Those are pieces of me in this foreign soil. I'm already being buried, even though I'm not dead yet. But we dug because not digging meant dying. And in those early days, we still cared about dying. We still had that animal instinct for survival, that desperate clinging to life that had not been beaten out of us yet. We dug trenches and communication trenches and supply trenches and reserve trenches, creating a labyrinth of channels that cut across the landscape like wounds in flesh. We reinforced the walls with whatever we could find. Plastisteel panels from wrecked vehicles, corpses when nothing else was available, prayer scrolls nailed to wooden posts that rotted away within days. I remember nailing up those prayer scrolls and actually believing they would help. I remember whispering prayers while I worked, my lips moving in the litanies my mother taught me as a child. I remember feeling like the Emperor was watching, like he cared what happened to us. I do not pray anymore. My lips still move sometimes, but no words come out, just muscle memory like the death spasms of something that used to be alive. The enemy came on the 5th day. We did not see them at first, only heard them, a sound like nothing I had words for then, and have only inadequate words for now. Imagine a scream that has been mechanized, fed through rusty pipes and amplified until it ceases to be a sound and becomes a physical force that hammers against your eardrums and makes your teeth ache. Imagine that sound multiplied by thousands, by tens of thousands, all of them slightly out of sync, so that the noise achieves a kind of hellish harmony. I pissed myself when I heard it. I actually pissed myself like a terrified child, felt the warmth spreading down my legs, and could not even be ashamed because half the men around me were doing the same thing. Sergeant Hake was shaking so badly he could not hold his laser gun. Corporal Vesson was praying in a high, thin voice that did not sound like his voice at all. Then they came over the top of the ridge that marked the edge of no man's land, and I saw them properly for the first time. I wish I had not. God, Emperor, I wish I had died blind. I wish I had never seen what humanity can become when it turns away from the light. They were not human, not anymore. Perhaps they had been once, but whatever had been human in them had been burned away and replaced with something else. Something that moved wrong and smelled of sulfur and corruption. Their armor was fused to their flesh. Their weapons were extensions of their arms. Their faces were mouths, screaming prayers to gods whose names I dare not write even now, lest writing them give them power over me in whatever comes after this life. I froze. I actually froze, my finger on the trigger but unable to pull it, my body betraying me in the moment I needed it most. Sergeant Hake hit me, slapped me hard across the face, and screamed at me to fire. The pain broke through the paralysis, and I fired. I fired until my laser gun was hot enough to burn my hands, but I could not stop because stopping meant thinking, and thinking meant seeing what I was shooting at. We fired. Emperor knows we fired, and men fell on both sides, and the first bodies began to accumulate in no man's land, piling up in drifts like snow that screamed. The enemy reached our trenches, and I killed my first man there, my first thing that had been a man, and felt his blood spray across my face, hot and wrong, burning like acid where it touched my skin. I screamed. I screamed and killed and screamed and killed until my throat was raw and my hands were numb, and I could not tell anymore if I was still human or if I had become something else. Something that existed only to put a bayonet into flesh and feel it pull back out with a wet sucking sound. They retreated at dawn, but it was not a defeat. I knew it was not a defeat because they were laughing when they fell back, actually laughing. And the sound was worse than their war cries. It meant they had enjoyed it. It meant this was fun for them. I vomited after they left, just collapsed against the trench wall and vomited until there was nothing left inside me except bile and terror. Cullen found me like that and sat with me, his hand on my shoulder, not saying anything because there was nothing to say. We sat there until the commissar found us and told us to get back to our posts, that the Emperor had no use for weakness. I wanted to shoot him. I actually raised my laser gun and pointed it at his back while he walked away, and my finger was on the trigger and I was going to do it. But Cullen stopped me, grabbed my arm, and whispered, "Not worth it, brother, not worth it." I lowered the gun, and we never spoke of it again. Cullen is dead now. Of course he is. Everyone is dead. Everyone except me. And I'm only alive because I'm too much of a coward to die. The first week established the pattern that would define every day afterward. Every endless, identical day that would stretch on until I forgot there had ever been anything else. The enemy would assault at irregular intervals, sometimes twice a day, sometimes not for 3 days running, but always when we had begun to relax, always when we had started to believe that perhaps this time they might leave us alone. Between assaults, we would repair what could be repaired, bury what could be buried, and pray what could be prayed. The prayers rang hollow in my mouth. I would recite the litanies and feel nothing, just words without meaning, sounds without power. But I kept praying, because not praying meant admitting that we were alone, that the Emperor had abandoned us or had never cared in the first place. And I was not ready to admit that yet. I'm still not ready, even though I know it is true. The commissars walked the trenches with bolt pistols drawn, reminding us that cowardice was rewarded with a swift death, while courage was rewarded with a slow one. They shot men for having fearful expressions. They shot men for muttering in their sleep. Once they shot a man for weeping when he discovered his rations had been contaminated with trench mud. That man was named Doran. He was 34 and had a wife and 2 daughters back home. He showed me their picture once, a hollow pick he kept wrapped in waterproof material close to his heart. The daughters were twins, maybe 6 years old, with their mother's smile. He told me their names, but I have forgotten them now. I have forgotten so many names. He was not weeping because of the contaminated rations. He was weeping because he had just received word from a supply servitor that his wife had been killed in a bombing raid on their hive level. His daughters were orphans, and then the commissar shot him for weakness, and his daughters were orphans with a dead father too. I helped dig his grave. We buried him in the reserve trench with 50 other men who died that week. I wanted to say something, some words that would matter, but my mouth would not work. I just stood there, with dirt in my hands, and tears on my face, and hatred in my heart. Hatred for the commissar and the enemy, and the Emperor, and myself, most of all. The rations came irregularly, delivered by supply servitors that trundled through the communication trenches on tracks that ground the mud, and occasionally the wounded, into paste. The servitors were lobotomized criminals, their brains scooped out and replaced with mechanical processors. They had probably been men like us once, men who had committed some crime against the Imperium and been punished with a fate worse than death. I watched them sometimes and wondered if they were happier than us. If having your mind erased was a mercy, if not knowing, not feeling, not caring was better than this endless awareness of your own degradation. They did not speak. They did not acknowledge our existence. They simply arrived, dispensed their cargo of corpse starch rations and ammunition canisters, and departed, leaving us to divide the supplies among ourselves according to a hierarchy that had nothing to do with rank, and everything to do with who was willing to kill for an extra ration bar. I killed for food once, stabbed a man named Pella through the kidney when he tried to take my ration. He looked so surprised, like he could not believe I'd actually done it, and I could not believe it either. I stood there with my knife in his back and watched him slide down the trench wall, leaving a smear of blood. I took his ration and ate it and tasted nothing. No one reported it. No one cared. The commissar walked past Pella's body the next day and stepped over it without breaking stride. I learned to eat without tasting. The corpse starch was made from reclaimed biological matter, from the dead, from us, from the enemy. from anyone who fell and could not be identified anymore. We ate our comrades, and I knew it, and everyone knew it, and no one talked about it because talking about it made it real in a way we could not handle. Sometimes I would find something in the corpse starch, a piece of bone, a tooth. Once I found a finger, or part of a finger, with the nail still attached. I stared at it for a long time, this piece of someone who had been a person. And then I ate the rest of the ration bar because I was hungry, and hunger does not care about horror. The water was worse. It came from the same supply servitors and containers that had once held promethium or coolant, or the Emperor alone knows what. It tasted of chemicals and metal and made your stomach cramp. But we drank it anyway because not drinking meant dying of thirst. Men who drank too much too quickly vomited it back up. But we drank anyway, always drinking, never satisfied, always thirsty. My tongue felt like leather. My lips cracked and bled. I dreamed about water sometimes, about the clean recycled water from my hive block, about rain that did not burn your skin, about rivers I had never seen except in Hulovitz. I would have killed for a glass of clean water, actually killed gladly with no remorse. That is what I had become. A creature that would trade murder for comfort. Sleep was impossible. Not because of the noise. You learned to sleep through the distant rumble of artillery and the crack of lost fire and even the screaming of the wounded. But because of the dreams. Emperor, have mercy. The dreams. Every man in the trenches had them, the same dreams. And we learned quickly not to speak of them, because speaking of them gave them power. But I will break that rule now. Because I'm beyond caring about rules or power or anything except getting these words out before the end comes. I dreamed of drowning in mud, of being buried alive and feeling the weight of the earth pressing down on my chest until my ribs cracked. I dreamed of the enemy wearing my face, of looking down at my own hands and seeing them twisted and wrong, fused with metal and leather. I dreamed of my mother's bakery. But when I went inside, all the bread was made from human meat. And she smiled at me and offered me a slice. And I ate it because I was hungry. God, Emperor, forgive me. I ate it. I dreamed of a voice calling my name from deep beneath the trenches, a voice that was kind, kinder than any voice I had heard in months, a voice that promised rest and peace and an end to suffering. All I had to do was dig. Just dig down instead of out. Dig until I reached the place where the voice originated. And I would be welcomed and embraced and granted the oblivion I craved. I woke from these dreams weeping. I woke with my hands already moving, already clawing at the trench floor, already trying to dig towards something I could not name, but desperately wanted. Sergeant Hake would find me like that sometimes and shake me awake, and we would look at each other with the understanding that we were both losing our minds, that sanity was just another casualty of this war, that soon there would be nothing left of us but the shells we wore. Other men had worse dreams, or perhaps better ones, depending on your perspective. Men who woke screaming about golden halls and beautiful angels that spoke with voices like breaking glass. Men who woke weeping and trying to claw their own eyes out because they had seen something they described as perfection and could not bear to see the reality of the trenches after that. The commissars shot these men quickly before whatever they dreamed could spread to the rest of us. But I envied them sometimes. At least their madness was beautiful. Mine was just mud and blood and an endless voice calling me down into the dark. The wounded accumulated faster than the chirurgeon could process them. The aid station became a charnel house where men lay on top of each other, those on the bottom drowning in the blood of those above. I helped carry men there after they fell, and I learned to recognize which ones would live and which ones would die by the way they looked at you. The ones who were going to die had this look in their eyes, this distant focus, like they were already seeing something beyond the trenches. The ones who were going to live still had fear in their eyes, still cared about survival, still clutched at your uniform and begged you to save them. I preferred carrying the dying ones. At least, they did not beg. The chirurgeon worked by the light of a single flickering lamp, his hands steady from the obscura, but his eyes increasingly vacant, as if he had retreated somewhere deep inside himself where the screaming could not reach. His name was Medici Apprentice Cororo, but we just called him Doc when we called him anything at all. He amputated limbs and burned stumps closed with a thermal lance, and packed wounds with bandages that had been used before on other men and were stiff with dried blood and other fluids. The screaming in the aid station never stopped. Never. It was like background noise, like breathing, always there, and you learned to tune it out or go mad. Doc talked to himself while he worked, little muttered prayers and curses and sometimes conversations with people who were not there. Once I heard him apologizing to his mother, telling her he tried his best, but it was not good enough. It was never good enough. And please forgive him for failing. He ate his bolt pistol 3 months ago, just sat down during a quiet moment, put it in his mouth and pulled the trigger. No warning, no goodbye, just done. We got a new chirurgeon 2 weeks later. This one does not talk at all, and his eyes are completely empty. And I think maybe they already did to him what they should do to all of us. Take away our ability to feel anything. I saw men die in ways I had not imagined possible, in ways that make me wake up gasping even now, in ways that will haunt me for however long I have left. A man named Harrow took a last bolt through the throat and drowned in his own blood, his hands scrabbling at the wound as if he could hold back the tide. I tried to help him, pressed my hands over the wound. But the blood just kept coming, hot and slick, pulsing between my fingers with each beat of his slowing heart. He looked at me while he died, just looked at me with these wide, terrified eyes. And I could not look away. I could not give him that comfort. I just stared back and watched the light fade and felt like I was murdering him somehow. Like my inability to save him was the same as killing him. When he finally stopped moving, I sat there with my hands still pressed to his throat, and I could not let go. Hake had to pry my fingers away, had to drag me back to my position. And my hands were shaking so badly I could not hold my lasgun for the rest of the day. A man named Kellis was hit by artillery, not directly, but close enough that the concussion wave liquefied his internal organs. He stood for a moment, looking confused, and then blood began pouring from his nose and mouth and eyes, and he collapsed into a puddle of himself. And I started laughing. I actually laughed because it was so absurd, so impossibly grotesque, and if I did not laugh, I would scream, and I might never stop screaming. Hake slapped me again. He seemed to spend half his time slapping sense into me. I miss him. I miss him so much. It is like a physical wound, and I know that is stupid because I barely knew him, because he was just another soldier in just another war. But he was kind to me when he did not have to be. And kindness is so rare here that it burns itself into your memory like a brand. A man named Thresh was grabbed by something during a night assault, something that came over the top of the trench in the darkness. We heard him screaming for 3 days from somewhere in no man's land, and we could not go get him, could not even mercy kill him from a distance, because we could not see where the screaming was coming from. On the 3rd day, the screaming changed. It became something else, something that was not quite human anymore, something that called to us in Thresh's voice, but with words that the Thresh would never say, promising us things in languages we did not know, but somehow understood. The Commissar ordered artillery on that section of no man's land, and the screaming finally stopped. And we were all relieved and terrified because we knew that Thresh would come back eventually, that he would assault our trenches wearing a twisted mockery of his own face. And some part of him might still be in there, trapped and aware and begging us to kill him. He has not come back yet. I scanned the enemy lines during every assault, looking for his face, dreading it and hoping for it at the same time. Because at least if I see him, I can grant him the mercy of a clean death. The nights were worse than the days, infinitely worse, and I started to dread sunset like a man dreading his own execution. During the day at least, you could see the enemy coming. You could see your squad mates, could identify them by their faces or their gear or the way they moved. At night, in the absolute blackness of the trenches, when the chemical fog rolled in thick enough to drown in, you were alone, even when surrounded by other men. The darkness was total, complete, a living thing that pressed against your eyes and filled your mouth and nose. We were forbidden to use lights, except in the most dire emergencies, because light drew enemy fire. So we moved through the trenches by touch and memory, our hands trailing along walls of mud that sometimes gave way beneath our fingers, revealing voids where things nested and waited. I felt them sometimes. These things in the voids, felt them moving, breathing, watching. Sometimes they touched me back, cold and wet and wrong. And I would jerk my hand away and stumble backward and crash into whoever was behind me. And we would both end up in the mud, gasping and terrified, and trying not to scream. Because screaming at night meant the Commissar would think you were panicking and shoot. Sentries stood watch in firing steps carved into the trench walls, their eyes fixed on the darkness of no man's land, seeing nothing but unable to look away, because not watching meant death for everyone. Men went mad on sentry duty. They would be found in the morning with their throats slit by their own knives or their laser guns empty, fired at targets only they could see. I did sentry duty 3 times a week, and each time I was certain I would die, not from enemy attack, but from my own mind turning against me. The darkness played tricks. You would see shapes moving out there, hear sounds that were almost words, smell things that should not exist. Your imagination would create entire armies advancing toward you, and you would have to hold fire, had to be certain before you revealed your position. And by the time you were certain, it was often too late. I almost shot Corporal Vesson once. He came up beside me during my watch, and I did not hear him approaching. And when I turned and saw a shape in the darkness, my finger was already pulling the trigger. And only at the last second did I recognize his voice, saying my name. "It is me. It is me. Do not shoot." In this terrified whisper, we held each other after that, actually held each other like children, both of us shaking and crying, and trying not to make noise. He whispered that he could not do this anymore, that he wanted to go home, that he missed his wife and his son, and he just wanted to see them one more time before he died. I told him we would make it. I told him the offensive would succeed and we would be rotated out, and he would see his family again. I lied to him because that is what you do. You lie to each other and to yourself, and you pretend that tomorrow will be different, even though you know it will not. Vesson died 2 days later. Not in combat. He just gave up, stopped eating, stopped moving, just sat down in his dugout and stared at nothing until his heart stopped beating. The medic said it was some kind of infection, but I knew better. He died of despair, and that is a disease no medic can cure. I kept his hollow pick of his wife and son. I do not know why. I look at it sometimes and try to feel something for these strangers, try to feel the weight of their loss, but I cannot. I can barely remember what love feels like, what caring about someone means. But I keep the hollow pick anyway, carry it next to my heart where Vesson carried it. And maybe that means something. Maybe it means I am not completely gone yet. I made more friends despite knowing better, despite swearing each time that I would not get attached again. You cannot spend months in the trenches without forming attachments to the men around you, even though every attachment is a wound waiting to happen, even though you know that caring about someone means watching them die and carrying that death with you forever. There was Private Cullen, barely 18, who sang hymns in a voice that was surprisingly beautiful. He believed with absolute conviction that the Emperor watched over us personally, that every bullet that missed was divine intervention, that we would prevail because faith alone could turn aside the darkness. I envied him that faith. Envied him so much it hurt because I had lost mine and could not remember what it felt like to believe in anything except suffering. His faith broke in a single moment. We were repelling an assault, and one of the enemy got close enough that Cullen saw his face properly, saw the devotion in his eyes, the ecstasy, heard him singing prayers in a voice filled with rapture. And Cullen realized that they believed too, that they had faith too, that their gods answered them in ways the Emperor never answered us. He put his lasgun in his mouth that night and pulled the trigger. Just like that, his beautiful voice silenced forever, his faith shattered by the realization that believing was not enough, that the universe did not care which god you prayed to because all gods were equally cruel or equally absent. I could not even cry for him. I had run out of tears by then. I just helped carry his body to the burial trench and threw mud on top of him and walked away. And the hymns he used to sing echoed in my head for days afterward, mocking me with their empty promises of salvation. There was Sergeant Hake, who had survived 2 previous campaigns and who taught me everything I know about staying alive in the trenches. He taught me how to clean my lasgun with mud when water was not available, how to sleep standing up with your eyes open, how to tell when a man was about to break, and either help him or report him before he took others with him. Hake was hard, but not cruel. He cared about us in his way, even though caring meant watching us die one by one and knowing he would probably be next. He had scars all over his body, a roadmap of every battle he had survived. And sometimes I would catch him counting them like other men counted prayers, as if the scars were proof he had existed, proof he had endured. He made it almost to the end, survived everything the war could throw at him, lost fire and shrapnel and chemical burns and infections that should have killed him. And then one day, he just stopped moving, stopped eating, stopped speaking. He sat down in the corner of our dugout and became a statue, his eyes open and staring at nothing. We tried to snap him out of it, shook him, yelled at him, even hit him. Nothing. He just sat there breathing, alive but not living, until the cold snap came and he froze solid. We had to break him apart with hammers to get him out of the dugout, because his body had frozen to the wall. I took his scars with me in a way, not physically, but I memorized them, drew them in my mind like a map. And sometimes, when I'm trying to sleep, I trace them in my memory and pretend I'm as strong as he was. But I'm not. I am weak. I am so weak, I can barely stand it. The war changed as the months progressed, or perhaps I changed and the war stayed the same. It was hard to tell anymore. The enemy assaults came more frequently. The barrages lasted longer. The chemical fog grew thicker until even midday looked like twilight. The weak sun filtering through the mire like a dying ember. We stopped receiving reinforcements. The supply servitors came less often. Our uniforms rotted away and were replaced with whatever we could scavenge from the dead until we all looked like scarecrows, like walking corpses dressed in the rags of men who had died before us. The officers died or were promoted away to safer positions behind the lines. Command of our section fell to whoever had survived longest, which meant it eventually fell to me when the last sergeant took a last bolt through the head during a dawn assault. I did not want command, God Emperor. I did not want the responsibility of making decisions that would kill men, of choosing who would stand sentry and who would go on patrol, and who would be volunteered for the suicidal missions that came down from regimental headquarters with increasing regularity. But want had nothing to do with it. You took command or you were shot for cowardice. And so I took command and sent men to die, and tried not to think about their faces when they realized what I was doing to them. I became what I hated. I became the officers who had sent us here, who had lied about easy duty and rotation schedules and victory being just around the corner. I sent a man named Greaves on a patrol that I knew would kill him. I knew because the last 3 patrols to that sector had not come back, and I knew that whatever was out there was waiting, patient and hungry. But headquarters wanted intelligence, and I had to send someone, and Greaves was expendable because he had only been with us for 2 weeks, and I did not know him well enough to care. He looked at me when I gave him the order, just looked at me with this expression of betrayal. And I looked back and did not flinch, because if I flinched, I would break down, and then I would be useless to everyone. He went. He did not come back, and I marked him as KIA in my reports and moved on, because that is what you do. You move on. You keep moving until you cannot anymore. I became efficient at sending men to die. I learned to calculate odds and weigh the value of lives against tactical objectives. I learned to lie convincingly, to make suicide missions sound like they had a chance of success. I learned to sleep at night despite knowing that my decisions had killed men who might have survived if I had chosen differently. I became a monster, not like the enemy, not with twisted flesh and corrupted prayers, but a monster nonetheless. A bureaucrat of death, processing lives into casualties with the same cold efficiency that the administratum processed requisition forms. The patrols were the worst assignments I could give. We would be ordered to cross no man's land in the darkness, to probe enemy positions or retrieve supply canisters that had been dropped off target, or recover the bodies of the fallen for reasons that were never explained, but which I suspected had to do with preventing the enemy from using our dead for their own purposes. No man's land was a killing ground 500 meters wide, covered in shell craters and barbed wire, and the bodies of men from both sides who had died there in previous assaults. The bodies did not decay properly. The chemicals in the air preserved them, mummifying them into grotesque statues that reached toward the sky with clawed hands, their mouths open in eternal screams. You had to navigate through this forest of the dead, trying to move silently while your boots squelched in mud that was more blood than earth, trying not to look at the faces of the corpses because sometimes you recognized them. Sometimes they were men you had known, and sometimes this was worse. The corpses moved. Their dead eyes followed you as you passed, their mouths working as if trying to speak warnings you could not hear over the pounding of your heart. I lost men on every patrol. They would step on mines that had been placed there by our own side during earlier defensive operations, and which were now armed and waiting for anyone foolish enough to disturb them. They would be caught by enemy patrols and killed in knife fights that were silent, except for the wet sounds of blades entering flesh. They would simply disappear. There one moment and gone the next. Swallowed by the mud or taken by something that moved through no man's land like a predator through the tall grass. I stopped reporting these losses as anything other than missing in action because the commissariat wanted detailed reports of casualties. And I did not have the energy or the words to describe what had actually happened. How do you explain that a man simply vanished while you were looking at him? How do you explain that you heard him screaming, but when you reached his position, there was nothing there except his laser gun and one of his boots with the foot still in it? I went on a patrol myself once, the only time I've left the trenches since we arrived. I had to, because the men were starting to resent me for sending them out while I stayed safe. And I needed to maintain what little authority I had left. We crossed no man's land at midnight. 6 of us moving in single file through the corpse forest, each man keeping one hand on the shoulder of the man in front so we would not lose each other in the darkness. The dead watched us pass. I swear they did. I felt their eyes on me, felt their judgment, felt them silently asking why I was still alive when they were not. One of them grabbed my ankle, actually grabbed it, his hand shooting out from the mud where he had been half buried, his fingers closing around my boot with a grip that felt impossible for a corpse. I screamed and kicked free, and we ran, broke formation, and ran like children fleeing nightmares. And by the time we made it back to our lines, we had lost 2 men, and I had no idea how or when. I never went back out there. I sent other men instead and told myself it was because I was needed in the trenches, but the truth was simpler. I was afraid of the dead and the darkness and the things that moved through both. I was a coward wearing the rank of a corporal, sending brave men to die while I cowered in relative safety. The Vox system that was supposed to keep us in communication with regimental headquarters and with other sections of the line degraded until it was useless. We would receive orders that were garbled beyond recognition. Static-filled voices screaming coordinates that made no sense or demanding reports on enemy movements we had not witnessed. We would attempt to report our situation and receive only more static in response, occasionally punctuated by sounds that were not quite words, but which seemed to carry meaning nonetheless. A meaning that made your skin crawl and your hands shake. Eventually, we stopped using the Vox entirely, except during emergencies. And even then, we were never sure if anyone on the other end was listening, or if we were simply shouting into a void that shouted back in voices that were not human. The isolation was crushing. We had no idea if the war was going well or poorly, if other sections of the line were holding or collapsing, if the Imperium even remembered we were here. For all we knew, the war had ended and no one had bothered to tell us, and we were fighting a phantom enemy for phantom objectives in a forgotten corner of a galaxy that had moved on without us. I stopped believing in victory, stopped believing in anything except survival, and even that became negotiable. Some days, I woke up disappointed to find myself still breathing, disappointed that I would have to endure another day of mud and blood and screaming. Some days I stared at my laser gun and thought about how easy it would be to end it, how quick and clean compared to the slow death the trenches promised. But I did not do it, not because I was brave or faithful or because I still had hope. I did not do it because I was afraid of what came after. afraid that death would not be an end, but just another beginning, another form of suffering in a universe that seemed designed specifically to cause pain. We learned to recognize the signs that preceded an assault. The enemy would shell our positions for hours, not trying to destroy the trenches. They knew by now that we had dug too deep for that, but trying to break our will, trying to make us so desperate for the shelling to stop that we would welcome the assault as a relief. The ground would shake, the walls would collapse, men would be buried alive, and we would dig frantically to free them. And sometimes we would succeed, and sometimes we would just find pieces. The shelling would cease abruptly, and in the sudden silence, you could hear them massing in their own trenches. Hear the sounds of their prayers and their war songs and the grinding of their armor and weapons. Then would come the whistle, a shrill mechanical shriek that signaled the assault's beginning, and they would pour over the top and flood toward us like a tide of corrupted flesh and twisted metal. We learned to kill efficiently, with an economy of motion that came from repetition. Fire, chamber a new cell, fire again. When the laser gun overheated, switch to backup weapons. When those ran dry, bayonet and entrenching tool and bare hands. Aim for the joints in their armor where the fusion of metal and flesh was weakest. Aim for the mouths when they opened to scream their prayers. I killed hundreds of them, maybe thousands. I stopped counting, stopped caring, stopped seeing them as anything except targets that needed to be stopped before they reached me. I became a machine myself, processing living things into dead things with mechanical precision. But every kill took something from me. Every time I looked into their eyes as the light faded, I saw my own humanity dying with them. We were not so different, the enemy and I. Both of us were trapped in a war we did not understand, fighting for causes we did not believe in, dying for gods who did not care. We learned to recognize when a section of trench was about to be overrun and to seal it before the infection spread. This meant abandoning men who were still fighting, sealing them in with the enemy using demolition charges or simply collapsing the trench walls on top of them. You could hear them screaming from beneath the earth afterward, both our men and theirs, screaming until the screaming stopped or changed into something that was no longer quite screaming. The commissars called this tactical quarantine and shot anyone who hesitated to implement it. I gave the order to seal sections 4 times. 4 times I sentenced men to die slowly in the darkness, buried alive with the enemy. And I told myself it was necessary, that I was saving the rest of the line, that their sacrifice meant something. But I can still hear them screaming, even now, especially now. I hear them under everything else, a chorus of the damned calling my name, reminding me of what I did, reminding me that I'm a murderer pretending to be a soldier. The seasons changed, though I'm not certain this world had seasons in any recognizable sense. It grew colder, the chemical fog freezing into sheets of ice that coated the trench walls and made movement treacherous. Men froze to death in their sleep, and we left them where they fell because they made decent insulation for the living. We would huddle against their frozen corpses and steal what little warmth remained. And it did not even seem wrong anymore, because we were past the point where anything seemed wrong. It grew warmer, the ice melting and flooding the trenches until we were wading through water up to our waists, water that carried disease and filth and the dissolved remnants of the dead. Plague swept through the trenches, men dying of fevers and dysentery and infections that turned their flesh black and made it slough away from their bones. The chirurgeon did what he could, which was nothing, and eventually stopped bothering to treat the sick. focusing his limited supplies on men who had been wounded in combat and might still be useful. The sick were left to die in the reserve trenches, and their screaming joined the general chorus of suffering that formed the soundtrack of our existence. I began to change. Not physically, though my body deteriorated along with everyone else's. My teeth falling out and my hair coming out in clumps and my skin erupting in sores that never healed. No, the change was deeper. A fundamental alteration in the way I perceived reality. The distinction between day and night ceased to matter. The distinction between sleep and waking blurred. I would find myself standing in the trench with no memory of how I'd gotten there. Would discover hours had passed in what felt like moments. I would have conversations with men who had been dead for months and only realized they were dead when I reached out to touch them and my hand passed through empty air. The dreams became more vivid, more real than reality. I dreamed of the voice beneath the trenches with increasing frequency. And in these dreams, I would follow it down through tunnels that burrowed deep into the earth, down past the foundations of the world, down to where something vast and patient waited in the darkness. It did not threaten in these dreams. It did not demand. It simply offered peace, rest, an end to the suffering, an end to the guilt and the fear, and the endless awareness of my own degradation. All I had to do was dig. Just dig down instead of out. Dig until I reached the place where the voice originated, and I would be welcomed and embraced and granted the oblivion I craved. I started digging, not consciously, not as a decision I made while awake. But I would wake up, if wake is the right word, and find myself in the bottom of the trench with my hands bloody. The earth around me carved away in a pit that went down farther than I remembered digging. Each time I would fill it back in, would cover my shame, would pretend it had not happened. But it kept happening. The voice grew stronger, more insistent, more kind. It knew my name. It knew my mother's name. It knew about Vesson and Cullen and Hake and all the others I had lost. It knew about the men I had sent to die. It knew everything about me, every sin and every scar. And it loved me anyway. It promised that I would never have to make another decision, never have to kill again, never have to hurt. It promised me home. I was not the only one. I could see it in the eyes of the other men. A desperate hunger that had nothing to do with food. Men began disappearing from their posts, and we would find them later, having clawed at the trench floors with their bare hands, having dug shallow pits that went nowhere but which they defended with the fury of the insane when we tried to pull them away. The commissars shot these men naturally, but there were too many of them, and eventually the commissars stopped bothering and simply let the diggers dig until they expired from exhaustion or until something came up through the holes they had made and dragged them down. Screaming, I tried to resist. Emperor, I tried. I filled my mind with prayers and memories of home, but the memories were fading, becoming transparent, losing their power to anchor me to anything that mattered. I could not remember my mother's face. I could not remember the name of the street where I had lived. I could not remember why any of it had ever seemed important when weighed against the eternal now of the trenches. The decisive moment came during an assault that was like every other assault, and yet somehow different, somehow final in a way I could not articulate but felt in my bones. The enemy came at dawn, as they often did. But this time, they came in greater numbers than I had ever seen. A tide of corrupted flesh that filled no man's land from edge to edge. Our last fire cut them down, but for every one that fell, 2 more came behind. They reached our trenches and poured over the walls like a breaking wave. And we fought with everything we had, with weapons and tools and faith and fury and desperation. We fought until the laser gun in my hands melted from overheating, until my uniform was more blood than fabric, until I could no longer tell if the screaming I heard was coming from the enemy, or from my own throat, or from somewhere deep inside my skull. We fought because fighting was all we knew, because stopping meant dying. And even though death would have been a mercy, something in us refused to surrender. But we were being pushed back, slowly but inexorably, our defensive lines collapsing as section after section was overrun. I found myself in a communication trench with a handful of men whose names I did not know, and faces I barely recognized. All of us firing at targets we could not see through the fog and the smoke and the press of bodies. A shell landed close enough that the concussion wave lifted me off my feet and slammed me against the trench wall hard enough to crack ribs. I heard the snap, felt the pain explode through my chest, felt something wet and hot trickling down my side that was probably blood. I lay there gasping, unable to move, watching the battle continue around me with a strange detachment, as if I were already dead and viewing the world from somewhere outside my body. The enemy flowed past me, barely noticing my presence, focused on the men ahead who were still fighting. I saw one of my men, the one with the scar, I think, though I could not be certain, torn apart by fire that burned with colors that had no names. I saw another pulled down and consumed, his body disappearing into a mass of writhing corruption that left nothing behind except screams that continued long after the body was gone. And then, in the chaos and the horror, I heard it. Not the voice from my dreams, though it was similar. This was different, clearer, more immediate. It was coming from below, from beneath the mud and the blood and the churned earth. It was calling my name, my real name, the one I had not heard in months, the one I had almost forgotten. It knew me. It knew everything about me. It knew my fears and my failures and my desperate desire for everything to simply end. And it offered what I had always wanted: peace, rest, oblivion, an end to the pain and the guilt and the endless awareness of my own monstrosity. I do not remember making a conscious decision. I remember my hands moving of their own accord, scooping away mud, digging into the trench floor with a strength I should not have possessed given my injuries. I remember the earth giving way beneath me, revealing a hollow space that smelled of ancient darkness and copper and something else, something sweet and terrible that made my mouth water and my stomach turn at the same time. I remember looking back one last time at the battle raging above me, at the men still fighting and dying for a cause they did not understand. And I felt pity for them. Pity and relief that I was leaving, that I was going home, that I would never have to fight again. I lowered myself into that darkness, leaving the battle behind, descending into the welcoming void. The opening closed behind me, sealing itself with no effort from me, and I was alone in the tunnel, sliding downward into the earth. The tunnel was narrow, barely wide enough for my body, and it angled downward at a steep slope that made climbing impossible. I could only slide, pulled by gravity and something else, some force that drew me deeper with each passing moment. The sounds of the battle faded above me, replaced by other sounds, whispers and languages I did not know but somehow understood. The drip of water, or perhaps blood. A rhythmic pulsing that might have been my own heartbeat, or might have been something vast and alien that surrounded me on all sides. I should have been terrified. I should have been clawing at the walls, trying to climb back up, trying to escape. But I felt nothing except relief, and a strange peace, as if I were finally going where I belonged, where I had always belonged, and everything that had come before was just a long detour. I descended until I forgot what it meant to ascend, until up and down became meaningless directions, until I forgot there had ever been anything except this tunnel and this darkness and this inexorable pull towards something I could not name, but which I knew awaited me at the end of my journey. Time stopped meaning anything. I might have been falling for minutes or months or years. My broken ribs should have hurt, but they did not. Nothing hurt. I was numb, floating, dissolving into the darkness like sugar in water. The tunnel opened into a chamber. I could not see it at first. The darkness was absolute. But I could sense its vastness by the way sound behaved differently here, the way my breathing echoed and returned from directions that made no geometrical sense. The air was warm and humid, like being inside a living thing, inside the belly of some vast organism that had swallowed me whole. The smell was overwhelming, a combination of decay and fertility, of ending and beginning, of death that was also birth. It smelled like my mother's bakery, and like the aid station, and like something else entirely, something that had no comparison in my experience. And then there was light. Not the harsh electric light of the trenches or the chemical glow of flares, but a soft, pulsing luminescence that seemed to emanate from the walls themselves, or perhaps from within the walls, as if the chamber were lined with something organic that glowed with its own internal fire. The light revealed the chamber's true nature, and I should have screamed. I should have wept. I should have begged the Emperor for forgiveness, or for death, or for anything except this. The chamber was flesh. The walls pulsed with a rhythm that matched the beating I had heard during my descent, revealing them to be membranes, tissue that flexed and contracted as if breathing. The floor was covered in a substance that was neither liquid nor solid, that moved and shifted beneath my feet as if reacting to my presence. And throughout the chamber, emerging from the walls and the floor and hanging from the ceiling like stalactites, were shapes that had once been human, bodies or parts of bodies that had been integrated into the structure itself, their faces frozen in expressions that might have been agony, or might have been ecstasy, or might have been something for which human language had no words. I recognized some of them, men from my unit who had disappeared, who I had marked as MIA in my reports. They were here, had always been here, waiting for me. I should have fled. Every instinct I had left screamed at me to turn and climb back up the tunnel, back to the surface, back to the trenches and the war and the clean horror of battle. But I did not move. I could not move. The voice spoke again, and this time I knew where it was coming from. It was coming from all around me, from the walls and the floor and the bodies, and from inside my own skull. It was coming from me, had always been me, the part of me that wanted to give up, that wanted to stop fighting, that wanted peace at any cost. It told me that I had made the right choice, that I had come home, that I would never have to fight again, or fear again, or suffer again, that I would become part of something greater than myself, something eternal, something that had existed long before humanity reached this world and would exist long after we were gone. It told me the truth about the war, that it was eternal because it needed to be eternal, that it was a machine for producing suffering, that every soldier sent to the trenches was not a warrior, but a sacrifice, an offering to something that required a constant supply of fear and death to sustain itself. It told me that both sides knew this. The Imperium and the enemy both knew that the war was not meant to be won, but to be perpetuated. That every man who fell was not a casualty, but a tithe, paid to powers that humanity could not comprehend and could not resist. It told me that I was blessed, that I had been chosen, that I would never leave. The substance on the floor began to crawl up my legs, warm and wet and invasive, burrowing beneath my uniform and then beneath my skin, merging with my flesh in ways that should have been agonizing, but which felt instead like coming home, like a child being embraced by a parent after too long away. I felt myself changing, felt my body responding to the presence of whatever had claimed me, felt new sensations blooming in nerves I had not known I possessed. The broken ribs in my chest fused back together, but not correctly, not as bone, but as something else, something that breathed and pulsed and sang with the rhythm of the chamber. I tried to scream, but my mouth would not obey me. I tried to move, but my muscles had become foreign things, operating according to new rules that I did not understand. I was being unmade and remade, disassembled at the cellular level and reconstructed into something else, something that retained the memory of being human, but which was no longer bound by the limitations of humanity. The pain was exquisite. The pleasure was unbearable. The two sensations merged until I could not distinguish between them, until they became a single, overwhelming experience that consumed my entire being, burning away everything I had been and replacing it with something new. I do not know how long the transformation took. When it was complete, if complete is the right word, for I suspect it is a process that continues still. I was no longer Corporal Van Harkis of the 47th Karathi Drop Infantry. I was something else. Something that existed in the chamber beneath the trenches, integrated into its structure, feeling through its membranes, seeing through eyes that were not eyes, understanding through a consciousness that was both mine and not mine, individual and collective, human and other. I could see the trenches above me, could sense the men fighting and dying there, could feel their fear and their desperation and their pain, as if these things were my own. I could see Vessen's wife and son, orphaned and grieving. I could see Cullen's mother receiving notification of his death. I could see Hake's scars, all the battles he had survived just to die in the cold, forgotten and alone. I could see the enemy assaulting our lines, could see that they too were victims in their own way, pawns in a game being played by forces they did not understand and could not resist. I could see the commissars executing men for cowardice, could see the officers safe in their bunkers behind the lines, planning offensives that would accomplish nothing except generate more death. I could see the supply servitors trundling through the communication trenches with their cargo of corpse starch made from men who had once believed their service mattered. And I could see others like me, hundreds of them, thousands, men from both sides, who had heard the voice and answered it, who had dug down through the mud and found the chamber or chambers like it, who had been transformed and integrated and made part of something vast and patient and hungry. We were a network, a web of transformed flesh that spread beneath the entire battlefield, beneath both sets of trenches, beneath no man's land, growing and spreading with each man who gave in to the whispers and dug deep enough to reach us. We were the foundation upon which the war was built, the soil from which it grew, the eternal engine that kept it running forever. I understood then what the war was really about. It was not about ideology or territory or resources. It was about feeding. The war was eternal because it needed to be eternal. Because the thing beneath the trenches, the thing I had become part of, required a constant supply of fear and suffering and death to sustain itself. And I was part of it now. Part of the hunger, part of the machine. I could feel new men digging, feel them answering the voice, feel them descending into chambers like mine all along the line. I called to them. We all did. Called with voices that promised peace and rest and an end to suffering. Voices that were kind, because kindness was the most effective lure. Because men who had been starved of compassion would do anything to feel it again, even if it meant their own annihilation. I am part of the trenches now, part of the mud and the blood and the endless grinding machinery of a war that has no purpose except its own continuation. I'm aware of everything that happens above me. I feel every death, every wound, every moment of fear and desperation. I am connected to all the others who have been transformed. And through them, I experience the war from countless perspectives. See it unfold in ways no single human mind was meant to comprehend. Sometimes I think I should be grateful. The war is over for me, in a sense. I no longer have to fight. I no longer have to fear the next assault, or the next shell, or the next decision that will kill men who trust me. I exist in a state of perfect certainty, knowing exactly what I am and what purpose I serve. But other times, most times, I think I should be screaming. I think about the men still fighting above me, still believing that their deaths mean something, still clinging to hope and faith and the promise that the Emperor protects. I want to warn them. I want to reach up through the earth and drag them to safety, to tell them to run, to desert, to do anything except stay in the trenches and wait for their turn to be consumed. But I cannot. I can only call to them, can only whisper promises of peace, can only wait for them to break and dig and descend. Because that is what I am now. Not a victim, not a survivor, a predator, a lure, a tool of the thing that feeds on war. I write these words, though write is not the right word, for I have no hands or pen or paper. With the last dregs of my humanity, casting them out into the void in the hope that someone will find them and understand. These words are my confession and my warning and my plea. Do not dig. Do not listen to the voice when it calls. When it promises you rest and peace and an end to your suffering, it is lying. There is no peace here. There is no rest. There is only transformation and integration and the eternal hunger of something that wears the face of salvation, but is really just another face of war. I am Corporal Van Harkis of the 47th Karathi Drop Infantry, and I am no longer human. I am part of the trenches now, part of the machine that grinds men into corpses and corpses into fuel for an endless war. I am a warning that no one will heed, and a victim that no one will mourn. The Emperor does not protect trenches. Nothing protects trenches. We are meat for the grinder, numbers in a ledger, bodies in a trench waiting to be expended. And when we are expended, when we give up and give in and dig deep enough to reach the thing that waits below, we become something worse than dead. We become eternal. We become the war itself. And the war goes on forever, fed by our suffering, sustained by our despair, growing with each man who breaks and descends and joins us in the darkness beneath the mud. If you are reading this, if somehow these words have reached you, know that I'm sorry. Sorry for what I did. Sorry for what I have become. Sorry that I cannot save you from the same fate. Because the voice is calling to you too. And sooner or later, everyone breaks, everyone digs. And when you do, I will be waiting for you in the darkness, ready to welcome you home.